All right. Welcome everyone to Runners Roundtable podcast. Today I am talking to Kristyn R. Smith. She is our expert on all things New York City running, I'm sure, in addition to many other things within running. And I'm so glad to have you here to share a little bit about your story that I think people are really going to like, because I feel like a lot of people think runners have been runners their entire lives. And I would say the majority of runners start later in life. Like, not so much, I've been running since elementary school, high school. It's really just you start running at some point later in life. That's how I didn't start running how I'm running now until I was close to 30. And I love that that's kind of a part of your story. So before I even say that, how about you tell us about yourself and tell us your running story?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Yes, I was a late to the sport individual. I started at 35, and it was very humble beginnings. I didn't know any runners at the time. I got involved through work and through charity. So we literally just said, hey, we're gonna run. It happened to be a 4 mile race because in New York we don't have a lot of 5Ks. We do 4 miles around Central Park, and it was for charity. And so that was the whole thing. It was like, oh, let's just raise money and have fun. And so I did that. And we had such a great time. There was a lot of celebration around it. We sort of trained together, and we had like, we would run and then go to brunch afterwards. That was the big like selling point. It's like you go to brunch and um you know enjoy the company of everybody. And so that was sort of that this became a regular sort of routine. Every month, like we did another race. And again, none of us were runners. None of us came from any kind of athletic background at all. And so we had no idea what we were doing, like didn't have real like running clothes or running shoes or anything like that. It was all totally new to us. And so it evolved to the point where I kind of like had a sort of a knack for it more than others. Like I just had sort of an innate talent for it in the beginning, like not knowing anything. And so I kind of latched onto it a lot more than the others. And so over time, I became more involved. I started going to um, classes and run club meetings, because one of the beautiful things about New York is we have a million running groups for every kind of, like, you name it, every neighborhood, every area. There's a group of runners that are gathering any day of the week. And so I was benefit to that community, and really just kind of was welcomed in with open arms, and just really took off with it.
I love that. And that, I will say, as someone who's coming from Miami, I'm very jealous of that, of that big of a community. And it's not to say that Miami doesn't have community, but and I'm curious if that's really just like a difference between how Miami is set up as a city versus how New York City is set up as a city. Whereas here, you need a car to get almost everywhere. So the communities are so separate from one another that, and even the public transportation we have doesn't necessarily take you all the way to where some of these run clubs are. So I'm envious of that, at least the ability of having like a run club at, all 7 days of the week. I don't feel like we really have that here. Or maybe I don't know. And if anyone's listening to this and knows differently, send me an email, send me a message, and please educate me. But I love that, because I always say that when I fell in love with running, we lived in Chicago for a year in 2014 and 2015. And I always credit living there to being the time when I really fell in love with running, because all the runners, all the groups. I mean, I would see so many people out. Where I ran was just the lakefront trail. And I had, 18 miles from end to end of trail to run. And it didn't matter what time I went out, what day I went out, there was always someone out there. And it really is the running community is so awesome. Like if you can get involved in the running community, it's going to hook you to the sport of running quicker than anything. So I love that that was part of what really committed you to running. Was there So you started off with shorter distance races. Once you joined the run clubs and, started putting yourself out there, did the distances get longer for you in terms of racing?
Yeah, I went rather quickly to a half marathon. I again had I didn't train for them. I didn't know the process for training. That was all foreign concept to me at that point. However, again, a friend of mine was like, "Hey," a friend of mine, not a runner, a friend of mine was like, "Hey, we're going to do this half marathon. You should do it." And I was like, "Okay, great." I had never run anything. Like I had run 4 milers and 5Ks. And so I was like, "Oh yeah, sure, I can do that." And so I just signed up, and it's kind of a good place to be in where like you don't know any better. And so, I had no,
There's no
hesitation about it.
expectation. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, "Oh yeah, that's no problem." And I did it, and it was great. I had a wonderful time. Like I said, I didn't really train for it, but I ran fine. And actually, so that race happened to be a partial trail run. And I'm not a trail runner.
This
I'm not
story
a
is
trail
so
runner.
good.
We don't really have trails in New York. This was in upstate New York, several hours away. And so it was in a beautiful place. And I was just like, well, I mean, that sounds pretty. I want to go to the mountains. And so I did it. And I'm like, I didn't have trail shoes. I was not aware of the difference between like running on a road or running on dirt with rocks and gravel and all of this stuff. But again, it was just like, oh yeah, that sounds fun. I think I'll do it. And it worked out okay. I have since not run that many trail races. It's still not really a thing. It's still, kind of like a foreign concept to me. But yeah, that was like my first half was a trail half. So there you go.
And I love that. And I always think about that for myself when I first started running, where I was so open-minded to everything. And there are moments now where, not to say that I get upset with myself, but maybe I get a little frustrated with myself because I'm like, man, now that I know so much about running, about myself as a runner, I know everything that can go wrong. Whereas in the beginning, you really don't know. You're just like, oh, okay, let's see. Like, we'll figure it out as we go. Whereas now I'm like, oh, I know so much that sometimes that can feel a little crippling because now I'm going into runs or racing situations with a level of awareness and maybe even anxiety that I didn't have in the beginning. So it really just cracks me up that your first like half marathon was like a trail half marathon and you were like, okay, cool. How did you go from that experience? Because I feel like for some people, the trail running can be so challenging that I don't know. I mean, maybe this is just me because I've done one trail half marathon. And after that, I was like, never again. I will never do that again. Like there was a moment where I'm like, okay, this running stuff is really, if that's what running is, this is really, really hard. So what did you do after that trail half marathon?
After that, I actually signed up for another half marathon that was a month later. So I was not deterred in any way. Um, but yeah, I was like, oh, I can cover the distance. And I did. It wasn't pleasant in any way, but it was like I got through it. I did no injuries, no serious aches and pains or anything like that. So I was like, hey, let's do that again. Let's see what we can do. And the second one I did was in New York City a month later. And so that was like, again, it's not like, oh, now it's easy now. Doesn't become easy the second half marathon, but at least it didn't have a giant, there was a part in that first trail run where literally you basically climb over a mountain in the middle. So you come up and then you come all the way down. And so I didn't have that the second time. So I was like, okay, cool.
That's so awesome, because I'm thinking of now, again, like the knowing more means that I have a tendency to check elevation charts for different races. Now, in the beginning, I was just like, oh my God, this sounds so great. And I can't even tell you how many, there was one half marathon that I did in Asheville, North Carolina. And I remember thinking, oh, I can totally handle that. Like we're good. And I looked at the elevation chart. I was like, oh, I'm fine. Like, no problem. I was not fine. I struggled. I struggled so much because I'm like, this is not like, I come from Miami. Everything is really flat. Like if I have to climb 7 feet, my legs start to feel it. So in that Asheville race, I felt like I was climbing mountains, and this was a road race. But again, I just love that, thinking back to those times when we really didn't know any better and we were open to just whatever the experience was. So I absolutely love that that was your first half marathon experience, because it truly is going to be something you'll never forget.
No.
So great.
I can still picture it. It was a very, and I honestly, I didn't look at the course map. Like I was not, this is like, before I even concerned myself with any of that stuff. So yeah, a lot has changed. Let's say.
Yeah. How did you get into run coaching?
Well, so I was, again, really fortunate in that I was able to surround myself with a lot of coaches pretty early on. Again, going to run clubs and running with a group, there was always a coach present. And so they were always dispensing knowledge, even if it was to the group as a whole. I still learned, I learned everything basically because I didn't know anything. So every little thing was just like valuable insight to me. And so I'm always one to be very curious. So once I'm interested in something, I like to find out more. And so again, pretty early on, within a year or so, I ended up hiring my own coach. And so that I could like ask my own questions, and have somebody, direct me to the information that I was specifically looking for, and help me specifically with what things I needed help with. And so that was all just feeding my passion, feeding my interest, feeding my curiosity. And really, the coach that I ended up hiring at the time, my first run coach, really shepherded me and mentored me throughout over the course of years to let me kind of be my own coach. It all happened a little bit, here and there and here and there. But really that was sort of my first education, was just learning directly from him. And then subsequently after that, I went and did all the certification and all of that stuff. But really, I think, the thing that got me into it and that got me interested in it was just having a coach, talking to coaches, and being invested and involved in the sport.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to deepen the roots in the sport. And that's something I'm always advocating, right? Like putting yourself out there, going to run clubs, meeting other runners, meeting other people, because that mentor, that mentor is just a conversation away, but it does take you showing up to even open yourself up to that. So I love that. I mean, you said feeding my passion, feeding my curiosity. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right there. Like you have very similar values to me, because that for me, it's constant curiosity about everything. And I love that you took the initiative to find a coach that you recognized. I'm really curious. Let me get a coach, because then that coach is going to be able to answer my specific curiosity. Because yeah, when you go to those group runs and maybe there's a coach there, the coach is going to give more generalized information, versus someone you're working one-on-one with is going to give you that information that's really pertinent to you and to what you need to know, or what you want to know, or how you want to improve. Because it's also, everyone has different goals. Even when they go to a run club, right? Everyone has different goals or different reasons for being there. Are you currently coached by anyone right now?
Yes, I am. Yeah. So I've sort of gone back and forth. I've done my own, like I've coached myself,
Yep.
and it works up to a point, but I there's so much to be gained by having another set of eyes, another brain. um, you know, I know myself really well. I'm very in tune with myself as a runner, and with life and stresses and all of that. However, I can we can all be our own worst critic, or we can all sort of stand in our own way a lot. And so having another person to really just help you break through those barriers is I think invaluable. And so, I've done it with and without. And, I don't think I'll ever, well, we'll see, but I hope to never have to do it alone again, because it just means so much to me. Just even on a mental level, like psychologically, right? Just having this idea of somebody else being in your corner, right? I mean, it doesn't even have to be about the quote, the run per se, right?
Yeah. And I also think it's, as someone who very similarly, I self-coached myself for the first few years that I was running. And then I had a bad racing experience, which I've talked about at the 2017 Chicago Marathon. And after that, I was like, okay, I never want to feel like that. I do not want to repeat that particular racing experience. I need to put my training in someone else's hands. Because also, and I'm sure you could agree with this, like it's a lot more fun to think of someone else's training plans than it is to think about your own
Oh my
training
God,
plan,
yes.
right? Like to me,
Yes.
it's thinking about other people. I'm like, oh, there is a puzzle. Like here's a puzzle that I'm trying to figure out. I don't want to think about myself. For me, when it comes to the work that I do as a runner, as an athlete, I'm like, just tell me what to do and I'll show up and I'll give it my best. That worked honestly. And I look over here because I have all my books, but it's like that worked for me in the beginning, when maybe, and I don't know if it's similar for you, where it's like coaching myself in the beginning really worked because I had so much curiosity about everything. Because you said it so perfectly, where it's like I learned everything because I knew nothing, right? So I think in the beginning it was a lot easier to coach myself because I really didn't know what I was doing. But now that I know myself more as a runner, I think I really, really, really do think it's what you said, where I know that I am my own biggest critic. So if I'm coaching myself, I have no one to check that voice that says I'm not doing enough, or I'm not enough, or I'm not strong enough, or I'm not fast enough. Whereas if I have a coach, it's like, okay, no. They're giving me workouts because they believe that I'm strong enough. They believe that I can do that. So I love that, because I think that's such an important aspect of the coach athlete dynamic, and you're experiencing it for yourself, which then I'm sure trickles down to the people that you're working with as well.
Yes, for sure. I'm also of I've got myself into that sort of uh rat race sort of trap where you're always trying to like, I'm trying to outdo my previous training cycle. So it's like, you get into that, like if you've done well for a little while, you get into that part where you're like, well, I have to do more, I have to do harder, I have to, and you just like keep piling on, piling on. And it's like at some point you are going to hit the wall, or you're going to, you're going to run up to limitations where it's like more is not always possible and is not always even best, right? So that's one of the other things that I really value in having a coach is that, I have somebody saying like, hey, no, like, just like, let's pull it back a little bit, right? And really to keep me in check, because otherwise, again, as you were saying, that with that little voice in your head, the little voice is like, oh, just do some extra reps, do some extra miles, do faster, do this, and it's like, it's easy to fall into that trap for runners, for coaches too, so having someone else to be like, hey, this is enough, this is what you need to do, that's really beneficial.
That is. And I'm thinking, now that you say that, it's making me think about when I was training myself. So I had done a few marathons on my own. I had self-trained, and I always, not that I would burn out, but definitely I would reach a point where I was very discontent with running because it was taking up so much time, because in that era everything was about high mileage. And I remember, here I am, and honestly, like, it works, what works for each person is what works for each person. At that time, I was trying to get 60-mile weeks, like, and I was, a young mom of two and all this stuff. And I always remember, again, if you're from Miami, you can only understand that, and I have friends who do this as well, where I would drop my kids off at school and then start my runs at 9:30, 10. And here I am trying to have these like 55 to 60-mile weeks because that's what I thought I needed.
Yeah.
And yeah, I ended up getting to the marathon finish line, but there was always a process. And everyone in my household, like, this is just the family lore right now, is that I continuously sign up for marathons, even though I don't like them. And I feel like, I'm like, I really want to like them. I feel like I'm just missing the sweet spot of liking them. But I had that moment in my last training cycle, which was for last year's Chicago Marathon. And I think I maybe reached 45 miles. That was maybe the highest mileage that I got. Race day did not go how I wanted in terms of time, but I had so much fun. Like, I've never had so much fun running a marathon. I mean, when I finished, I was like, I never want to do that again. But I still had so much fun that it really, hearing what you said, you just helped bridge this gap for me of, yeah, at that time I thought like, oh, I had to do a lot of mileage. I had to do a lot of mileage. And I always felt burnt out. Whereas last year, I think the mileage that I was given was, it just made more sense with my life and how I wanted to live my life. And I think that also speaks to what you're saying as to the coach. Like, the coach has that more objective global view that can then create a training plan that is going to work for you depending on what your goals are. How do you, and just right now, I'm like, oh my God, thank you. I just want to thank you for bridging that gap for me, because it's just like, and it's funny because I always think about this too, where I feel like such a stronger runner today than I've ever felt. And yet the feeling of being a strong runner, and this is my own mental issue, but because you bridge the gap, I'm like, wait, I'm going to share this right now. Yeah. I feel like a stronger runner today than I've ever felt. And yet that's not necessarily reflected by PR times. And I shared this in another discussion where it's like, oh, wait, I haven't really had any PR times since 2016. And if I really fall down that rabbit hole, I can feel pretty like crappy about myself. But when I step back and I'm like, oh, but I feel like I'm a stronger runner today than I was in 2016. But it is also that comparison trap. Like you brought up the comparison trap. And even I have to stop myself from comparing myself to who I was in 2016, partly because I'm older now. Like I'm
Yes.
older. My body has different needs. My recovery needs are different. So I just want to say thank you for bridging that bit of runner history for me, because it is very easy to go down the path of thinking that I have to do more. And you said it, more is not always possible and it's not always best. So how did you come to that? Like, how did you as a person, as a runner, as a coach, realize that for yourself?
Um, well,
Now, now
let's
putting
just
you on the
say,
spot.
no, well, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's like, I, I learned it by doing it, by failing, by pushing myself to the point where I, was, too tired to really do well. And I was on a nice steady progression of like, PRing, PR. And then it gets to be a point, right? It's where it's like the PRs become harder, they become smaller. And that's natural and normal. But again, like your brain is like just trying to reach for, what's the solution? What's the thing that I can do? And so it's like, well, I'm just going to do as much as I possibly can. And so I had a really good Boston in April. That I set a PR on in Boston, which is hard. It was a 2:58:27. So I was very happy about that.
Yes.
I turned 40 in June, and I was like, I'm gonna be, this masters runner that's like setting, PRs as a master. And I worked, my tail end off all summer, and I ran a fall marathon, and it was 6 minutes slower than April. And I had spent all summer I mean, I have done 100-mile weeks, so it wasn't like a new thing to do 100-mile weeks, but I was doing way too many 100-mile weeks back to back to back without any recovery weeks in there. And I got tired. I was tired. By the time I got to the race, I was just like, I was kind of like over it, right? Because I had spent all my energy and efforts in training. And by the time I got to the race was like, I was, I had already like, I was donezo by that point, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's how you have to learn. Sometimes you have to like make the mistakes, and then figure out, okay, so that didn't go well, so I don't want to do that again, right? And I'm, it's not about like not putting in hard work, because I am all about putting in hard work, but like you need to have some ability to recognize when the work is beneficial and productive, and when the work is destructive and counterproductive, right? Because you can be doing the same thing, and it can fill one of those two roles. And so that's really hard. One of the things that I try to get my runners to recognize is that I need you to recognize when you're digging yourself into the hole, and you're just digging deeper, because it takes all of that time to get out of it, right? So
Yep.
don't put yourself in there in the first place. That's the best place to be. And so we just have to work on that together, because I do coach several runners that are so like gung-ho and 110% committed, that they will like, be sick as a dog, and like, oh, I have a cough and I have a fever and I have a thing, but I'm gonna go out and run. And I'm like, please, no, stop, like, don't do that, like. But they're like, no, I really want to get my run in. It's like you really do need somebody sometimes to say, no, don't do that thing. And so I try to impart that into to people I'm coaching, because I think it is important, and it's sometimes a hard skill to learn for these, like, we're type A, control, performance driven, metrics, like, oh, it's all about the data, my weeks,
Yeah.
my mileage, my paces, my all this stuff,
My heart rate, my
Woo, yeah.
cadence, all that stuff. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. And I also want to share because I feel like I just realized this too as you were talking. I'm like, oh my God, I keep saying like I haven't had a PR since 2016. And yet the past 3 years have been like a blur. Like I'm like, for runners, the fact that we made it through the pandemic
Yes.
and all of that, like, we had a few years there where no racing happened at all, where we could not, test our fitness in a racing environment. So I just want to point that out before I go on, and before anyone says, Steph, get over that 2016 stuff, right? Because
Yeah.
it is true that we do, and I see this all the time. I'm like, man, us runners, we love the metrics, but we love the metrics so much that it prevents us from accepting where we're at right now. And I always tell people whenever they ask me, like, should I run? I'm not feeling well. Should I run? I'm feeling this. I'm like, you don't ask me, because I am overly cautious, and I'm going to tell you to rest. I'm going to tell you to take even more rest than what you think is necessary, because ultimately the goal is for you to take as little time off of running as possible. So if that means you take the next 3 days off so that you can run well for the next 4 weeks, versus run the next 3 days, but then you mess yourself up so bad that you can't run for a week and a half. Like, those are kind of those negotiations that we're making. But I love it, because I hear you talking about your runners, and I'm like, but that's all us runners. All of us runners are like that. And I'm totally like that too, where if I'm not feeling well, I'm like, am I really not feeling well? Or am I like tired? Or I even, make those negotiations of like, oh, just go out for 10 minutes and then see how you feel. And like, if it's okay. And then once I'm out there, I'm like, but I'm already out here. Like, I need to finish it. Like, I can't wait. So it is really hard for people to put that pause on themselves. So I'm glad that you're like, no, we can pause. We can, put those metrics aside. It's totally okay, but it is hard. And one of the questions that I've been loving asking everyone is, how do you deal, or what are the conversations like when you notice that maybe one of your runners, like, let's pretend it's a runner that says, hey, I'm not feeling well, or, era of pandemic, right? Like, oh, I have COVID. And you're like, okay, don't run. But then you see that they're still running. Like, how do you have that conversation with them of, I think you should be resting more, or maybe like, yeah, have you had conversations like that with some of your runners about needing to take more time to recover?
Yes, I have. I've had several runners that have had COVID. None of them have actually run when I've said not to, so that's good. But my feeling is really that by the time I find out, or if you're telling me that you're not feeling well, or I've had runners that have had injury issues,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, I feel like by the time I find out, if you're going to the length of telling me, it's probably bad, right? Or it's probably been ongoing for a while, right? We're not usually the type of like, oh, I coughed one time, now I got to tell my coach. But it's like, usually, if you feel a niggle, or you feel sick, or you feel under the weather or something, in most cases, it's like it's been ongoing for days and hours, and then they decide, okay, now I'm going to tell the coach. And so my general rule of thumb is that, if they're even saying anything to me, it's probably pretty bad. People are, for the most part, if they have a sniffle, or they, have a sneeze or a little cough, they're going to go out and run anyway. Like, they're not asking me if it's something minor.
Yeah,
That's
that's true.
been my experience anyway. So I'm sort of in the same vein as you. It's like, my suggestion in all those situations is rest, 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 rest.
Yeah. I always tell people, I'm like, rest and hydrate. Like, those are the two things you need to do: rest and hydrate. But I always laugh when I think about how stubborn us runners are. Like
Yeah.
it's very hard to be told you can't run. And still, even for myself, and I totally acknowledge this, like anytime I talk about how runners behave, I'm throwing myself in there because I'm the same way. Where it
Yes.
was like, I remember last year after the Chicago Marathon, my coach was like, 2 weeks off. And I'm like, okay, but I feel really good. And like 2 days later, I was like, I just want to go for a short run. So, like, I want everyone to know, if you're listening to this, it's not because I don't do it, it's because I do do the
Yes.
same things that I
Yes.
say not to do. And it's one of those things where it is really hard to see the big picture as a runner. It is really hard to know that, okay, after a marathon, yeah, you want to take that time off to recover so that when you go back to running, you're coming back stronger. It's hard, especially, in my case, like last year, where I had a lot of fun. So the soreness, like it wasn't, my body was just so different after that experience that I was like, oh, totally, I can run. Like, I don't feel sore. Like, I can use the bathroom. I can get on a toilet. I can walk upstairs. Like, all those benchmarks sometimes of like having ran a really hard race where you're like, nope, I can't sit on the toilet, running upstairs, bending down. So for me, that was one of those things where I had to like stop myself and be like, Steph, what are you doing? Like, really, why are you doing this? Just because you feel good, right? Like, my mind feels good, it doesn't mean that my body didn't just do something incredible. And again, like I think us runners can be a little stubborn with things like that, and even understanding when we need to take that time to rest. How do you encourage your runners to add in that recovery time, to add in that rest, or even thinking of the workouts that you program for people, right? Where it's like, okay, when you're given a recovery period, like take advantage of that recovery period, or when you're given the intervals, like do what you can during those intervals. How do you encourage people to rest and recover?
Well, I'm a big advocate of modeling that the appropriate thing to do. And so I personally feel, pretty strongly about not racing too much and being very selective about the things that you want to do. So one of the ways that I go about that is I talk about goal setting with my runners, and we identify early on, okay, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish with this next 6 months, with this next training block, with this next year, right? And what are the priorities, right? Because you can't have, like there's only so many things under the sun that you can do. There's only so many hours. There's only so many ways that you can devote your energy and your time and your effort. And so you have to focus on things. So, somebody will come to me and they're like, oh, I signed up for this and I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do, it's like a long laundry list. And I'm like, well, see, we can do all of those things, but you have to prioritize certain things, right? And so you can't have your cake and you eat it too. First, for several reasons. One, burnout. Two, I hope that everybody has some longevity in the sport, right? So it's not that, like, you don't have to do all the marathons and all the races in one year, because they're going to be here next year and they're going to be here the year after that. So it's okay to spread it out, right? It's okay to like pursue this one thing now and then come back to this other thing later. Like I have runners that are focused a lot on a marathon PR, and it's like, it's it's really hard to focus on a marathon PR, but then also try to do these other races at other distances and do really well at them. And so, it's okay to have a marathon training focused, a marathon focused training block, and then later do something else, like use the rest of the year to do other things, to go after other distances and other goals. But it's really about talking about it and identifying what you want to do. Because it's very easy to just like get drawn into things, like, oh, my friend's doing this and oh, my friend's doing that, and just sign up. And so as a coach, think that's a really valuable thing that I provide, which is like this little voice or this little conversation we can have to say, okay, you want to do that, and what are the reasons that you want to do that? Is it because you just want to hang out with your friends? That's cool. You can do it as an easy run, right? Or you can go and cheer, and then you go take your friends out to celebrate afterwards, and maybe that's as exciting and as fun, and you get what you want out of that experience as well, right? It's just like identifying these things and talking about them, and so that you can sort of like work your way through it, right?
Yeah. And I love that line of questioning. Even there, it feels out of the box, but it makes so much sense of like, do you really want to run the race, or would spectating the race give you that same feeling? So I love that that's part of even just the questioning of, okay, let's really get down to what's behind the desire to do this race. Because yeah, it could very well be that spectating is way more in line with the reason for doing that race than actually doing that race. How do people come to work with you? So like walk us through are they sending you an email? Are they sending you a DM? Is there a consultation? How do you do, is the training plans, week by week, monthly? Is it a training plan for an entire race, or just what does it look like to work with you as a coach?
Sure. Well, I do offer a couple of different options, and they're at a couple of different price points. So if somebody wants like a lot of attention and a lot of one-on-one, I do run coaching, but I also do strength training because I'm a certified personal trainer. So like that's the full package with all the, bells and whistles and communication out the wazoo. And so that's at a higher price point. I have a lower price point where it's just run coaching and it's very limited communication. And so, it really depends on what does that person want, where they at in their training. Because there are people that are, they aren't ready for, or they don't really want to have somebody, like commenting on every single run, or, interjecting on every single run. And so that's fine. And so there's a price point for that. I'm listed on the VDOT marketplace. So I do all of my training in VDOT, which is a program similar to Training Peaks, or any of those online training calendars, training programs. But so that's where all the training lives. And a lot of people come to me just through word of mouth, because I am one of the coaches for a running club here in New York City, the Dashing Whippets. And so, we have a big membership. So, I'm out there racing or cheering. And, I also do pace for a lot of the races here in New York. So, I'm always encountering runners. So people come to me that know me in New York. And then, I have clients who are kind of all over the world. Some in Canada, Mexico. I was coaching somebody in Ireland.
I love that.
And so, yeah, so it's like, me trying to figure out kilometers and for all my workouts. But otherwise that worked out. I thank God for computers to do all of that.
Yep.
But I do coach online as well. So I'm happy to take people from wherever.
I love that you have so many different entry points too, to working with you, because I think, to your point of, there might be people who really want to coach, but don't necessarily want, like, they want the accountability of a coach, but not so much the day-to-day connection to a coach. So I really appreciate that you offer that, and that also you include the strength component, because again, as I get older, I realize how important strength training is. When I first started running, I almost miss baby Steph. I call her baby Steph. I almost miss the baby Steph that could roll out of bed, put clothes on, put shoes on, and just go out the door. Now it's like, I need at least an hour. I need to do my warm up. I need to have my snacks. Like, there's like this whole like checklist of things I need to do just for an easy run, right? It's not even like, so I love that there's there's also that, because it's your way of acknowledging that, hey, runners, in order to be a runner, you need to do more than just run. It's not just putting the shoes on and jumping on a treadmill or heading out the door. There's actually a lot more that goes into staying healthy, staying strong, staying injury free. And a lot of that really does have to do with strength training, with that recovery, with that resting. So to have those different entry points, it's great, because it's just, I feel like it would make it a lot easier for the people who work with you, right? Where it's like, okay, here's my one person stop for all those things. And I can't even imagine trying to come up with kilometers for people. Like, I think it's so great that that's something. Do you ever find that one of the themes I've had that's been coming up in a lot in these discussions is this idea of fit, and whether you fit the athlete and the athlete fits you in order for the relationship to work out? Have there ever been any athletes where you're like, you know what, this is not, you and I probably are not the best fit for one another? And if so, what usually, I guess, what usually lets you know that this perhaps may not be the best coach athlete relationship?
Well, I have an intro call with everybody. So I prefer to have a call with people before they even sign up. I do offer a free intro call. If you're interested or you want to know if we fit together or not, I will gladly talk to you. We will have, we can go over any questions you have. You can tell me about yourself. I'll tell you about me. And so I prefer that. I have actually had, this has only happened, I think, twice ever, but somebody just signed up out of the blue. I didn't know them. We didn't have any phone conversation before they signed up. And so I was then having the conversation for them after they had already agreed to, pay for the plan and everything. And so that ended up being a little bit of that was one of those situations where it kind of didn't really fit. And I felt like, from the phone conversation, it was pretty obvious that that was the case. But again, this person had already paid the money. So it was like, okay, so we're going to do it. And, that person ultimately didn't stick around because it wasn't a good fit. And I think they realized that as well. But, it was one of those situations where, they sort of were just, she literally told me like, oh, I just wanted to try this thing. And it was like, okay. So, that was sort of her attitude to it.
Right.
I like to, think of it as like, as really as a team effort and sort of, we're pursuing things. It's, it's a relationship, right? So, I'm a person that, I know kind of what you're doing almost every other, like most days of the week, right? And so
Yeah.
that you want that to be somebody that, that you kind of like get along with and see eye to eye with, at least in terms of running and goals and all of those things. And so, I really do encourage having, an idea of like what you're looking for, what types of things you want to get out of the relationship. So knowing why you're signing up for coaching to begin with, right? And then that helps me as the coach or whoever the coach is, that helps them determine if that's something that they, want to pursue as well, right? It is a two-way street. And so, I just think it's really valuable if everybody's kind of clear on what the goals are, what the intentions are, what the pursuit is, how you're going to go about it. I have everything sort of spelled out in terms of what means of communication are, when the communication is, all of those things. And so it's all from my end, it's all very clear and laid out. And so I think for an athlete coming to me, it's just a question of like, is that a style that works for me? Is that something that I want? And if not, that's fine too, because there's hundreds and thousands of us who do this out there. So there is someone for you, right? It might not be me.
Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful reminder for all of us where for, coaches, runners, athletes, everyone, right? Everyone, where there's enough people on this planet that if you're not the one for me, there's someone else out there that is the one for me. And I love that because for me, anyone that I work with, my question is always, why do you want this? Like, why do you want this? What's going to change about your life if you achieve this goal, and what's going to change about your life if you don't achieve this goal? Because it really is, when you understand why someone wants something, it really does make it just brings clarity into, is this the relationship? Can we be in relationship together or not? And there's, like you said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, okay, no, this isn't it. And yes, this is it. But I love that you highlight the importance of communication, and that again, you have those varying levels of communication of, okay, yes, I'm the coach for you, but now let's figure out, how much communication do you need from me? How much feedback do you need from me in order for you to feel like you're working towards your goals and achieving those goals? That is, and I just love that. Is this a style that works for me or is it not? Because it is true. You ultimately, who you are as a coach is very reflective of who you are as a person, right? So how would you describe your coaching style?
Um, well, so I do say this on my website, and I do communicate this with people that I'm coaching as well, which is that um we don't, our bodies, our minds, our lives are not organized into silos, right? So you may be a runner, but you're also any number of other things, right? You're a mom, you're a dad, you're a, son, daughter, and whatever you are at work, whatever you are to your community at large as well. And so you are one person, but you're all of these different roles, right? And so all of those things are impacted and affected by everything else, right? And so I really do, I'm not like life coaching you, but we do want to look at what other things are going on in your life. So one of the things that I really drill down on in the beginning is the schedule and what and flexibility and how we can make this work, right? Because let's take the holidays, which are happening now. It's like, if you're super extra busy at the holidays, which a lot of people are, extra parties, extra, gatherings, family, friends, holiday, shopping, and all of these extra responsibilities. Okay, you have to look at that, and that will then affect your training and say, okay, so I have to then do a little bit less because all of my time and energy is going into these extra areas that it isn't at other points, right? And so, we don't necessarily have to get into all the specifics, but it's like, if you're extra busy and extra stressed, then the training has to be pulled back for that. If there's points where things are going really well and you've got a really good handle on things, then we can push a little bit harder with the running and the training. But it's all about a give and a take, right? And it's who we are as people on the whole, in the whole of our lives, and not just like, oh, I'm this runner with this, this is my marathon time, and this is my half time, and this is my, it's like, it's good to know that, but all of these other things are important too, right?
I was going to say, thank you for pointing that out, because I try to tell people that all the time. I'm like, hey, remember, like, you're not just your number. And even when, and I can appreciate these programs that you enter your time and you enter your PR time, and then it populates all these workouts for you based on what you should be doing, or what you should be able to do based on your PR times. And I'm always like, okay, that's helpful, but that's just another data point in everything else. And I feel like maybe I'm a little controversial with this, but I'm like, even a PR from a year ago, I wouldn't base your current fitness on that from a year ago, because I don't know what life has done to you in that year. Like, yes, we know what you're capable of because you've done that, but if we look at contextually everything else, what if in that year you've moved, or in that year you've had a baby, or in that year, like your dog died or something like that? Like there's all this stuff that really factors into that, that you don't get the whole picture of the athlete if all you're doing is looking at their numbers. So I really appreciate that you take the context into their lives. But I think the flip side to that is you can take all the context you want, but if your athlete is not communicating that with you, how are you to know? So I feel like, yes, coach, yes, you're taking the context, but if they're not telling you any of this, if they're not saying, hey, Kris, like I have 5 holiday parties this week and all of this, you're just going to continue creating the plan based on what you think. So I think there's also that where you as a coach can only give so much if you're not getting information as to what the full picture is for the runner.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I sort of lean towards, I was talking to a newer runner recently, not new runner, but new to me.
Yeah, beauty.
And and she was like, well, my last coach, just like I wouldn't hear from for 2 weeks or whatever. And I was like, that you will have the opposite problem with me, whereby I will be bothering you every other, bothering you, quote unquote, every other day, going, how's it going? What's going on? How's all of this stuff? Like you will hear a lot from me. So that having somebody that's like, you're just radio silent, at least from my end, is not something that occurs. And so it's like, again, it all goes back to style and things. But I certainly, I want to know how the runner is feeling and how they're doing, again, so that I can then figure out what kind of load they can handle, right? Or should we be building? Should we be maintaining? Should we be regressing? Like, what should we be doing? But yeah, it requires communication from the other side for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's 100% in line with your curiosity as a person too, right? Because the more you know, and even something like that, that also helps build the relationship too. Because if you have a runner and you're asking them, how are you doing? How is it feeling? Guess what's going to happen? That runner is going to start sharing more with you. And then you're going to paint the picture in even finer detail. If you had to put your coaching philosophy as a one sentence lit up on a banner, what would that be?
Oh dear. I do have this.
That's the one. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm definitely going to put you on the spot with this
I
one.
do have this written on my website, and I'm not going to, and it is a sentence, and it's like, it was one of those things that I spent like months crafting, and I'm not going to be able to repeat it now because I don't have it memorized, but it's something to the effect of, running is more than just running alone. And so I take a holistic approach to it, incorporating things such as strength, recovery, nutrition, stress, and psychology, or something to that effect. And it's just that it is really, I try to touch on all of these different things, right? And so, the balance and the progress comes from stress plus rest. And so I like to make sure that my runners are getting rest, are recovering, are eating properly, are in a good place, in a good headspace, right? If you're one of those, if you have one of those jobs where you're like under a really tight deadline and it's coming up, it's right, like it's going to be really difficult to hit your best performance at that point, because your brain is partially occupied and focused on other things, right? So again, all of these things are really taken into account, because again, it all feeds off each other, and ultimately we want to be healthy and happy individuals, right? Like,
yeah,
that's like the big picture. At the end of the day, it's like, I want happy, healthy runners. I want people that are, like enjoying the process and enjoying what they're doing. And so that's really the ultimate goal, and the ultimate takeaway at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think I always say this, where it's a lot of us runners, we are, quote unquote, recreational runners, right? Where it's like, we're choosing to do this. This is how we're choosing to spend our free time. And if it isn't bringing us that joy, or it isn't bringing us that happiness, then it is an opportunity to kind of step back and reflect on, okay, if it's not making me happy, if it's not something I'm enjoying, then why am I doing this? Because time is so limited, and a lot of us already have that time taken filled up by things we don't want to do, but we have to do. Right. That running is one of those things where, in my opinion, it really should be something we want to do. Even, and I think of it for myself, like even when it's hard and even when it sucks, because sometimes it sucks, like even in those runs, it's what was it? This was maybe last week on one of my runs where I was like, okay, I 90% did not want to do that, but 110% grateful that I did. And I think that's a lot of what running is. So if it isn't bringing that joy, or it isn't at least leaving you, because again, I think sometimes I go into runs where I'm like, I really don't want to do this, but when I finish, I'm just so happy that I did. I'm happy that I took the time, or that I challenged myself to do that. But if it ever gets to that point where like I finish the run and I'm still grumpy and I'm still like, again, it's an opportunity to be like, okay, is this really what I should be spending my time doing? Or is this maybe a little sign that I'm starting to get burned out, and that I do need to step back. So I love that, because I think people, when they seek out a coach, and I'm hoping this conversation is really, really going to highlight it for them, is that your coach isn't just there to give you a training plan. Your coach is there to take everything that's happening in your life into consideration, so that they can create a training plan that fits within the demands of your life. Right? Like, at least that's what I hear from you when I'm like, oh yeah, so she wants to know like the holiday parties. She wants to know the sleep. She wants to know everything. She wants to know what's going on, because then for you, that's how you plan. You maybe this is a week where a runner has all the time and all the energy to get in every single workout and nail them all. And then maybe next week is a week where there's so much going on that they do have to scale back. And again, like that's the benefit of a coach, is that you know how to scale them back and then get them back to wherever they need to be. Whereas I feel like sometimes you'll have people who are like, I'm so busy, I just can't do it at all. And it's like, but yeah, like maybe we can fit it in, but we modify it. And maybe that's more of like people don't like to modify and would rather just not do. I don't know.
Yeah, that's sort of, so I do have the various levels, but even like my quote lowest level, I do not produce, like, I'm not going to give somebody a plan and just be like, here you go. That's it. And end of conversation, end of coaching relationship, end of everything. I have been asked for that at various points. Like, hey, can you just write me a plan? I can, but it's honestly, it's not, I'm just not interested in it, to be honest. That's not what I want out of coaching. And so, if you want just a plan, like there's a million other ways to go about it. And that's kind of I'm not the person for that. And so, if, my interests just lie in other ways, in other areas, as you're saying. And so that's sort of, that's how I've, crafted my coaching position. And so that's what I pursue. What, again, what I want to do, what I enjoy and what I like is the thing that I'm doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that it's the same where it's like, you keep doing it, and the people who are looking for that, they're going to find you. They're going to find you one way or another. All right. Final question that I have, and we always end up on this question, or this is the second to last question. And I'm curious, and I'm also really curious to hear your answer to this, because your running community is so different than mine. But how can we make running more accessible?
I love this question, first of all. and this was a question that that actually my club has dived into in a very serious kind of like devoted way. Just like, how do we work on this? And I think it is something that ultimately we struggle with even here in New York, because we although we have a lot of options, there's not a lot of blending between, right? So it's very like neighborhood specific, right? So it's like you end up, New York is a huge, big, crowded city, like people from all over, all different walks of life. But the people that you're kind of around end up being the people that are really just within a few blocks of you.
Yeah.
And so it really becomes about reaching out across the neighborhood lines, trying to go to other places, trying to outreach to other places and other people. And I really do think you have to put effort into it. I think, if you just like wait, stand around and wait for it to happen on its own, it's not going to happen, right? And so one of the things that we have done as a club is we've partnered with other clubs to do certain runs. Usually they're part of some other activity, like
Oh, I love
eat
that.
dinner, or bar crawls, or like something like that. But it's like partnering with another club to do a thing, and a 3-mile run. We also, our club itself sponsors a track meet every year, and we get other clubs to come to and participate in our track meet. And there are certain other clubs that also host their own track meet. And so it's literally a way to like invite other people that you don't really interact with necessarily all that much, but we're in the same city. We just like not
Yeah.
really, we're kind of like walking blindly past each other every now and then. But one of the great things, so New York Roadrunners as a whole, which is a race organization, but also they do a lot of community outreach. They also sponsor club events and club activities, club races, and they have club standings and all of this stuff. So I think we do owe a lot of credit to them for making the club scene so important and so popular here. Like it's become sort of a rite of passage, like you get to, what all the other clubs are, because we're all coming together, and everybody's wearing their singlets, and they've got, we got our hats, we got our socks, it's like everybody matches. You can recognize the other clubs like from a mile away, because everybody's got their uniform, right?
Right.
And it's pretty cool, like when who, like I know who all the clubs in New York are for the most part. When I go and like run Boston, the Boston Marathon or Berlin or Chicago, and you see the other New York City clubs, like you go and you're like, hey, New York, it's like,
Yeah.
what their club name. So it gives everybody a real sense of belonging for sure. But absolutely we could do more to like reach out across to other groups for sure.
Well, and I hadn't even thought of this, but again, it's like I feel like Miami's running community is probably younger compared to the running communities of up north and these more northern states, because it hadn't even occurred to me to think of like New York Roadrunners, their involvement in all of this, because down here I think it's very similar where again it's kind of spread out, and I maybe there are more run clubs. Again, if you're listening to this and you're in Miami, like message me about where these organizations are, these run clubs are happening, because it's almost like you have all the run clubs, people are making an effort to blend them, but then also you have this race organization that is also doing things to bring people together. And I'm trying to think of like, okay, well, what do we have here in Miami that might be similar? Because that's also a great way of increasing awareness, right? Because sometimes it's not even just, I mean, yes, accessibility is a big issue, but I think for a lot of people, it's just not even knowing
Yeah.
what is available to them. So to think of like, yeah, you can go on New York Roadrunners and find like maybe a listing of all the different clubs or something like that, or you can see what clubs have participated in past events. That definitely opens it up for you to be like, okay, so maybe there is a group here, or maybe there is a community there if I'm willing. It always comes back to, am I willing to put myself out there to like find these communities? But that is that's something that I feel like I'm going to look into here, because I've always said that my experience, and I think it's starting to change a little bit here, but that the Miami running community itself is very fragmented, again, geographically, because they're spread out in a lot of different areas. And I don't really know if there's anything beyond just races. Like when we have big races here, that those different communities start to mix in. So thank you for planting that seed, because now I'm like, oh, wait, so that is possible. Like it's possible somewhere else, like somewhere as big as, a city as big as New York City is doing something like that. I think that's a wonderful example to set for other people and for other cities as well, because it does the accessibility begins with connection, I feel. And the more connections you can make, the more accessible it's going to feel, and the more you're going to want to be a part of those communities as well.
Oh, absolutely. We also, in NYRR has a borough series, and they have a series of races that occur outside of Central Park and outside of Manhattan as well. And I mean, there are people that only like we go out there's you go out to Queens, you go out to Brooklyn. There are people that live in Manhattan like I do, and the only time of year they go outside of like their borough of Manhattan is to do the race that they put on. It's like it takes an hour to get out to some parts of Brooklyn, or an hour to get out to some parts of Queens. It's not that far, but it takes a long time. And so
Yep.
but having someone sort of force you to, and then like you have a good time and you get to see these new areas, and you get, a lot of times we'll set up a brunch or a gathering, after that race, because you've traveled all the way out there. So let's
Yep.
like, sit and enjoy this new neighborhood. And but so you kind of make it an event, you make it a thing that you're going to and that people want to go to anyway, because who doesn't want to race, right? And so
Absolutely.
everybody goes and experiences a new thing in a new place. And people come to that from locally, that again, like they don't want to go all the way to Manhattan and for an hour and a half, whatever. So it
Yeah.
works both ways, I think. Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, I think we are also creatures of habit and creatures of comfort. And we like to be in our comfort
Yes.
zones, comfort areas. And it does sometimes take something special like these races or special events to get people outside of their areas. But then all beyond that, it's like all it takes is making one significant connection.
Mhm.
And then maybe you don't do it every single week, but you're going to
Right.
be more open to doing it more often, right? Final question is, tell us where we can connect with you. What's your website? Do we connect best with you over on Instagram? How can we just learn more about you, maybe chat with you further in the future? And if you have anything exciting coming up as well.
I am on Instagram, Kristyn R. I'm not a frequent poster, so feel free to follow me on there. You'll probably only see something like once a month or maybe once every 3 months. Because I just only post about like some, whatever, like some super highlighty kind of thing. I'm not a frequent poster. But I do also have a website. And so that has all of my contact information. Like if you want to, have that intro call, or, find out what the different plans, coaching plans I offer. That information is all listed there. That is coachkrisrs.com. And so, that'll give you every kind of detail. I have an about section on there. I have all kinds of different, I haven't kept up the blog part of it, but there is a blog part where I was writing sort of kind of advice articles and things like that. So you can pursue that and peruse that, if you like. But sort of those are the kind of the best two ways. And that'll give you all the info about me.
Awesome. Well, Kris, thank you so much for being on the podcast and chatting with me today. I loved learning about you and your approach to running and your philosophy as a run coach. So really just thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Do you have any final words for us?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on, and I want to thank you for having this series. I think it's wonderful. I really hope that more women go into coaching. There's not a whole lot of us. And so the more the merrier. You can coach, you can be a runner, and you can be an example for your community. So it is certainly a little bit uncomfortable at first. Step outside of your comfort zone. But the rewards are plentiful and great. And so, if you've been thinking about it, please do take some steps in that direction. And I'm happy to give advice or, help, sort of guide those who are new or who are interested in pursuing that as well.
I love that full circle moment. I feel here where it's like you were mentored and now you're telling people, hey, I'm a resource for that as well. I'm not even going to say anything else. I just want to thank everyone for listening because I want to leave us on that. And I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.